years, as Andrew's mentioned, Paediatric Clinical Networks and the Voice of the Patient. So Charlie and I are going to cover, first of all, an introduction to paediatric networks. I'll then talk about some existing networks. Charlie will then cover networks and next steps. And then we will both talk about the voice of the patient, so in this case usually the child, but in some cases the parent, particularly for younger children. And finally we'll cover the benefits of using networks and working together. So first of all, I just wanted to sort of introduce the talk by introducing paediatric clinical trials. So as many of you will know, most drugs prescribed for children have not been tested in children, and therefore physicians haven't really got any choice but to prescribe off-label. In the early 1990s, regulators tried to encourage paediatric trials, for example by offering periods of drug exclusivity, etc. But since then, really, most agencies have now moved on to legislation. So, for example, in the US, the PRIA and the European legislation, Pediatric Clinical Trials. And there have now been more studies conducted in children in the last 5 years than in the previous 30 years combined. There are a few different types of paediatric clinical networks. So you can have country-specific networks or national networks. You can have disease-specific networks, or sometimes even a therapeutic area-specific network rather than an individual disease. And then there's also EnprEMA, the European Network for Pediatric Research, which is actually a network of networks, and I'll explain further about that shortly. So first of all, I just wanted to mention that paediatric clinical networks vary very much in size, in the funding, and in the services they provide. But in this slide, really, I'm covering the services that generally clinical networks are able to provide. So they won't all be able to provide all of these services, but most clinical networks will be able to assist you with feasibility, so at a country and also at a site level. And they'll be able to help in identifying sites. They will be able to provide protocol review, not only by medics, but also in many cases by pharmacists, and also by parents and children, as we'll discuss later. They can put you in touch with key opinion leaders, and this can be really important and helpful if your company is moving into a different therapeutic area with that you're not familiar with. They will be able to link you up with some key opinion leaders who will be able to help you with your studies. They can help with regulatory and ethics committee submissions. They may be able to help speed those up or help access them. They may have a good relationship with their local ethics committee. They can help with site support, for example, by providing research coordinators or research nurses. And they can help with review of patient information sheets and recruitment documents. And as we'll discuss later, they, in some cases, can provide access to parents and children or family input, which can be really important and helpful. And finally, they can also help with budgets and contracting. So, for example, the UK's Children's Network that I'm going to talk about shortly have a costing template, which can often help with speeding up these processes. So, I'm now going to talk about some existing networks. So, first of all, to mention some national networks or country-specific networks. At the top here, I've got the NIHR CRN Children's Network in the UK, and this was formerly known as the Medicines for Children Network, or MCRN, so some of you may be more familiar with that acronym. There's FinMedPed, which is a Finnish network, and then OKIDS is a fairly recently set up Austrian network. And then some disease-specific networks examples are ESGAN, which is the European Society of Paediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology and Nutrition, so that covers a sort of range of diseases in that therapeutic area. There's the PENTA-ID network. Now, this network was originally set up as a collaboration of European HIV centres, actually quite some time ago, around 20 years or so ago, so it's fairly well established. But more recently, they've also included, by recognising that clinical trials in children were also needed in infectious diseases, so they now also encompass infectious diseases. And then the European Cystic Fibrosis Society, or their clinical trials network is called ECFS-CTN, and this is one of the EnprEMA networks that I'll talk about shortly, but in that specific disease area. So coming back to EnprEMA, so as I mentioned, this is a network of research networks, investigators and centres that have recognised expertise in performing trials in the paediatric population.